Okay, I think let's get started. Good afternoon, colleagues from Brazil and Mexico. My name is Marcio Silva Filho, and I'm actually Deputy Provost of Postgraduate Studies at the University of Sao Paulo. I'm delighted to launch this third webinar, heading to the new normal, and how COVID is changing higher education and the perspectives for university research and teaching. And I would like to welcome you all to this international forum. This event is organized by the Postgraduate Office of the University of Sao Paulo, with the participation of the Institute of Biology at the University of Brasilia. By sharing perspectives about the successes we have had and the challenges we have overcome as well, we can learn from our universities in Brazil and abroad. And during these forums, we will be presented with several institutional plans for moving ahead. We have already had two very exciting events, and today we will have the opportunity to hear the insights and perspectives from Latin America. Our moderator is Professor Aziz Saliba, who is actually Vice Chancellor for International Office from Federal University of Minas Gerais. Thank you very much, Professor Saliba, and the stage is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Marcio. Dear members of the audience, dear speakers, it's an honor to serve as moderator in this distinguished panel. And I would like to thank our colleagues at the University of Sao Paulo and at the University of Brasilia for the kind invitation to serve as moderator in this distinguished panel. Death, pain, and material losses, the effects of COVID-19 have been unprecedented and devastating. COVID-19 has brought enormous challenges to our lives and many uncertainties about the near future. Getting a picture of the possible aftermath is crucial to navigate the troubled waters of the pandemic. So our guest today may help us shed some light in knowing where we are and what lays ahead for higher education. Each guest will speak for up to 15 minutes and will then move into a discussion where I'll pose some questions and also get some questions from the audience. Our first guest will be Professor Raul Rodriguez. He is the Associate Vice President for International Affairs of the Monterrey Tech from Mexico. He has served as CEO of the North American Development Bank and is Executive Director at the Mexican Foreign Trade Bank. Dr. Rodriguez, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. Boa tarde. I'd like to start by thanking the Fulbright Commission, this consortium, for hosting us today. I'm honored and particularly honored to be here with my esteemed colleagues from the best universities in Brazil. This is clearly a timely conversation. And interestingly, universities are, on the one hand, the cradle, the cornerstone of innovation, as we all know. But by the same token, we tend to be very resistant to change, and this has been the case throughout history. We are a realm, we live and dwell in a world of traditions and pedigrees. And again, we're rather averse to change. But today, in the near future at least, we are bound to see dramatic, unprecedented transformation. And I think it's unavoidable, in my view, in the realm of universities. As Paul Valéry said right before the beginning of World War II, in the preamble of that war, he said, the future is not what it used to be. And that clearly applies to where we are in universities. The landscape within COVID is already changing dramatically, extensively. So clearly, the transition and the recovery into a new reality will be more difficult than the current efforts that we're having to have as we face the epidemic. And there will be a clear divide between the before COVID and the after COVID eras. So today, I think the big question is, can we go back to some sort of old normal? I think that's impossible. And how do we go into a new normal? By simply adapting or by changing the old patterns and the old mindsets and leaving them behind and creating a better post-pandemic world. Hopefully, we opt for the latter. And I think in order to do that, this kind of interaction between the best universities in the world is critical. And the best universities, clearly, in the case of Latin America, is crucial. So as universities with a large enrollment, we are all very large universities. I think the smallest one in our group is maybe 50-something thousand students. So the challenges are particularly complex, and that, again, should compel us to this kind of conversation where we share best practices and ideas as to how to create that better reality for our universities and for higher education in general in our hemisphere and throughout the world. Let me start with a very brief description as to what Monterrey Tech is, and then give you a sense of how we're facing the pandemic, the kinds of challenges that we see ahead, and the new reality as we've been discussing. Tecnológico Monterrey, also called Tech, is the largest private non-profit university system in Latin America. With 2 universities, we have 55 campuses throughout Mexico altogether, close to 150,000 students, a health system, as well as senior high schools. Tech is best ranked as a private university in Mexico, is the best ranked, and it's particularly strong in engineering and business administration. In order to face the pandemic, our scale has called for complementing our structure with 10 or 11 task forces, all the way from campus operations to academic continuity, from the crucial emotional health of our students to financial support and sustainability. We're trying to maintain a very flexible, nimble structure with long-term resilience in our minds. So again, let me address 3 aspects of our reaction and our thinking: how we are addressing COVID, the challenges that we see ahead, and the transformation that most likely will happen in the university world. In terms of facing COVID, we have used 4 sets of values and roles that I think are critical today, and I think most of us are implementing at different levels of scope. First, our immediate obvious responsibility and concern has to do with facing the health crisis internally and externally, and I'll describe that further in a minute. Second, we obviously have a key academic responsibility, and we're facing that as we speak in terms of how do we go back to a new normal, as the title of this conversation suggests. Third, in the midst of the crisis, we need to continue keeping an eye on the future. We have to be more creative, enterprising, and even disruptive than we were before. And fourth, it is an essential calling for our universities to contribute to a sense of direction, a purpose, of hope, particularly among our students. In Mexico, there have been some recent surveys where universities have consistently ranked the highest in terms of trustworthiness among all kinds of institutions: government, Congress, the police, the army, etc. Universities are the most trustworthy institutions in Mexico, at least, and I think it's the case throughout Latin America. So the litmus test for our performance is precisely the level of trust that we nurture, that we maintain among our students, our faculty, and our stakeholders. We believe we have been relatively well prepared for COVID-19 for 3 main reasons. The first one is the academic model. We call it Tech 21, Tech 21. It was designed based on input that we received from education experts and insights from our links and visits to more than 40 of the best universities around the world. It allowed us over recent years to transition our whole system into a sort of a hybrid approach, away from the kinds of discipline silos, that have been present in university life forever, and away from lecture-based courses. Our students today learn by solving real-world challenges identified and selected by faculty together with partners in the outside, in the real world, quote unquote, external partners from industry, from the public sector, from the communities, providing a very rewarding experience that increases learning outcomes, actually, and connects the students and the university with the community in much better ways than we did before. It develops and it uses state-of-the-art technology extensively, online, blended learning, virtual and augmented reality, adaptive learning, you name it, we've been using it for years. So again, this has been crucial as we face the new challenges of COVID-19 and the shutdown. We were well prepared, at least in that realm of technology and of our academic model. The second element that has been very helpful is we have a very strong health system, which includes a medical school, 2 hospitals, specialty institutes, and several research centers. It has helped us structure our internal safety measures, and it has also positioned us at the forefront of our service to our country from the beginning of the pandemic. We have implemented over 200 initiatives in a very close partnership with the private sector, with civil society, with government, coordinating different sector approaches and cooperation and research projects. For the longer run, we're fostering a change in Mexico's health culture by embracing a system for comprehensive prevention, preparedness, wellness, longevity. The third element that I think has been crucial in being ready for the pandemic is the international nature of Monterrey Tech. We are by design an international institution, which has allowed us to access the best practices around the world through our partners abroad. And it has been relatively easy to do that. If we want to continue striving for excellence, and if we want to address the COVID-19 and the post-pandemic challenges based on the best experiences from all over the world, we can't simply focus on domestic connections, which are important, but again, complementing with the international links is crucial. We have a wide array of very deep and enduring academic and research links around the world, strengthened through 14 offices that we have abroad, outside Mexico, and 660 active cooperation agreements. For example, Tech is the only Latin American partner in MIT's nanotechnology lab. Its new prototyping lab located at the center of the MIT campus was named Tecnológico in Monterrey. The only Latin American member of the MIT Corporation, which is the MIT board, is the chairman of our board. So again, that part of our life, of our DNA, has been instrumental. We have in fact been also placing special emphasis on our own hemispheric platforms in Latin America. For example, we have a consortium called La Triada, which we created about 2 years ago. And it's a partnership with the other 2 top-level private universities in Latin America, Católica de Chile and Universidad de los Andes in Colombia. We're currently operating close to 50 joint academic and research projects together. And again, it provides a platform for us to share best practices. Tech is contributing today close to, or before the pandemic, close to 20 to 30% of international mobility in Mexico. We had almost 11,000 students of Tech studying abroad in close to 50 countries. And we were hosting close to 5,000 students, foreign students from about 70 countries. So that enables close to 60% of our graduates to have an international experience before they graduate. We're actually aiming for 100% before graduation. It's going to be difficult, incrementally difficult, but that's our goal. And this ultimately it's the pathway to the formation of global citizens with a global mindset, which is a key component of our mission. Our global connections are not limited to what we do in terms of mobility with students and faculty. For example, once a year, our whole board goes abroad. We've been in recent years in Boston, in Palo Alto, in Austin, in Chicago, in Israel, in Singapore, in China. And the purpose is for the board to be better acquainted with the kinds of relations that we're establishing with leaders, with corporations, with universities, with organizations, and with which we aspire to be partners, or more closely partners, and particularly in places where innovation and entrepreneurship are as important as they are, as I mentioned, in Israel and Singapore and China, or in Palo Alto. Our cooperation links also extend to international organizations. For example, we're a constant participant in the World Economic Forum councils and platforms. Our president today is a participant in the University Leaders Dialogue on COVID-19 that the World Economic Forum has convened. Our international efforts in terms of educational innovation are also part of what we do. We have an international conference, which is the largest in the Spanish-speaking world, with about 4,000 attendees every year, particularly in the case of educational innovation. And we're launching an Institute for the Future of Education as we speak, precisely to think collectively about the future of education. We're very much an entrepreneurial university. Actually, Princeton Review, which ranks entrepreneurial programs and efforts in universities, has us in their 8th place in the last survey, in the last ranking, and we're top in the world outside the U.S. So again, there's a strong commitment to that. We have about 8 accelerators, 12 technology parks. We have the leading innovation festival in Latin America once a year, etc. And finally, in terms of what we're doing internationally, we have a very close working relationship with corporations such as Microsoft. Last Wednesday, our chairman and I hosted a virtual conversation with Bill Gates, which provided very timely guidance and inspiration as we tackle together this difficult crisis. Last year, I hosted Microsoft's president, Brad Smith, in one of our campuses in Mexico City in a Fireside chat like this one. 680 of our alumni, of our graduates, work at Microsoft, 400 of them in the US, mostly in Seattle. So again, there's a very, very strong relationship. We believe in international cooperation. We believe that forums such as this are crucial in terms of understanding where we are and where we want to go. 2 final comments. One, in terms of our concerns. It goes without saying that our concerns are mostly related to developing opportunities for our youth, their capacity to react, to adapt to new circumstances, to find meaning in their lives, and to face the kind of pressure and fear and uncertainty and anxieties that have been rising and have been compounded by the crisis. But second, we also strive to serve society. Latin America, and that includes Mexico, is the most unequal region in the world, with huge social, economic, and governance lags. And I think university has a fundamental responsibility, because these issues will be exacerbated after the pandemic. So again, that is crucial. And finally, where do we see the main lines of transformation for universities? And I'll end up with this. I think the immersive physical campus experiences will continue to be highly valued, and rightly so. Nothing substitute face-to-face community kind of environment that we form in university. That's a huge plus. There was an interesting article in The Economist in last week's issue having to do with the fact that many students are complaining about the fact that they can't have that, and again, rightly so. So that is a must. But however, distance learning, online blended learning is here to stay, and it should be considered not as an emergency remote teaching model, but as a fundamental component of the university experience from here on. We were already doing it. We were in an upward trend. Well, it's even more important today, and it's here to stay, as I was saying. So that is important. Shifting from lecture-based approaches to challenge-based learning will be important. And again, program offering, the focus, delivery, and operation methods, they will all be attending to new models. They will be growing free flow options based on micro-credentials and stackable programs and all that. So again, the whole scenario of how we teach is going to change dramatically, much more than what we were expecting in terms of recent trends. A university is, at the end of the day, is where students prepare not just for a job, but for life. Life in a world that is today highly challenging and volatile. We need to analyze collectively together the kinds of changes that society is going through, and that this pandemic will complicate. How the pandemic will shape and affect the needs and aspirations of the new COVID generations. As the Chronicle of Higher Education has underscored recently, reopening is a challenge unlike any university has ever faced. I think we will all benefit greatly by continuing to share ideas and experiences as we are doing today. Obrigado.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rodriguez, for the great presentation. Before moving to the questions, I will have Professor Carlos Griff's presentation. So without further delay, I would like to present you Professor Carlos Griff. He is the Vice President for Research at the State University of São Paulo, UNESP, and his academic background is in physics. He has held visiting professorships worldwide in prestigious institutions such as the Max Planck Institute, the École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne, Switzerland, the Huanzhong University of Science and Technology, HUST, in China. So, Professor Griff, you have the floor.
So, I'd like to start thanking very much for this invitation from USP and Universidade de Brasília, and especially to my friends, Marcio and Carlotte. This is, as already said by my colleague from Mexico, a very important opportunity to discuss these very important issues that is what is coming ahead. So I'll do basically the same as my colleague, but I will do it by showing some slides. I hope you can see it. And I will give it first a small presentation of what is UNESP, and afterwards come to the questions. So UNESP is a big university, as already mentioned by Raul. It has about 50,000 students. From this, 38,000 are undergraduates. It's all over the state of São Paulo. And we are ranked among the best research universities in Brazil. Typically, USP is the first, and we are ranking third, fourth, always in the high end of the ranks. And international collaboration is growing here quite a lot in the last few years, especially if we measure, for example, by the number of co-author publications. So this is a trend before the pandemic. And we had already some experience in the type of thing that we are doing now, like the BRAVE, which is kind of a collaborative teaching among different universities, as I mentioned here with COIL, with the State University of New York, or Po University, Drexel, and so on. And as the pandemic came to Brazil, we had to move fast and react to the pandemic. And so what UNESP did is to create a series of mechanisms to treat with what the pandemic was taking. So we had a committee built up very quickly just after the thing started to really go bad. And quickly we had quite a nice reaction from our researchers around all the campus. So many people joined together either to make the diagnosis. So we have 3 centers to diagnose COVID with the PCR, RT-PCR, as well as people doing from humanities to all kinds of things. One of our guys is actually helping the government with the measures to come back to normal. So one interesting aspect also was that we had quite a lot of collaboration coming from the private sector. So we had at least two mechanisms to have inputs from the private sector. One of them is called Parceiros Honestos, and we are quite happy to see that many big companies from Brazil, like Embraer and other partners, put some money to help us deal with the COVID. The other interesting aspect that I would like to share with you, which I think it's very important on how we can react and for the future, is that the challenge is actually not just a change of mentality, but we have to have infrastructure to deal with this kind of hybrid teaching that we shall do in the future. And by chance, I wouldn't say it was so thought like that, but by chance we had just signed it with Google to have access to many tools, and this was quite important. As you can see from the numbers, in a few months we had a lot of classes going on online, and it was of course due to this infrastructure we already had. So from the numbers, basically if we take the postgraduate courses, basically 90% of our institute and faculty did go to remote teaching, and about 88% of the courses were given in this new modality. And of course that the challenges are not just giving courses, but there was a lot of other things we did. And I'd like to point out especially this one, which basically psychologists were giving special treatments or attention to the people in need, since this was quite stressful for many people. From the point of view of our undergraduates, we did was a series of measures, but one that I would like to point out is that we did training, because people were not used to use online courses. So InovaGrad was a program from our graduate vice team that helped a lot of people to get used to it. So as already mentioned, in this a few days ago, about 97% now of the undergraduate courses were given here in UNESP. UNESP, as you have seen, is very heterogeneous. We have small faculties, big faculties all over the state. So I think we are quite proud that we could react quite well to this challenge. And nowadays, as you can see, about 87% of all the disciplines are already being given, are either on the way or finalized, since the semester here ends normally in July. So we have a plan of coming back, as USP has just published today. So this will be in phases, and it will be in different for the different areas. So for undergraduates will be different from the postgraduates, from the research, and this is on the way. Of course, that we have never done this before, so we still have quite a lot to learn about it. And in a very short way, this is the things I think I would like to stress. So what have we learned? We need to have more flexible teaching. This is what already has been said, not just by the colleague before me, but for the other speakers in the same session, the two other sessions that USP and Universidade Brasileira organized. And we are quite sure that we will change to this hybrid model, and we have the digital transformation, which is coming without any doubt. The other thing that we learned is that we can respond quickly to challenges. We can work or have direct support from the society. This is something that is still quite new here in Brazil, but I think we are destroying some walls that separates the university from companies. And we had a very nice experience with Embraer and Credicitas, which quickly gave us funds to do diagnosis. So we can do research using virtual meetings, and this is quite interesting as a tool in global perspective. So as in this hybrid model, it's not just for teaching, but also for research. I think we will have an opportunity to work together in a much more cohesive way in the future. The other important point that I'd like to stress is that I think the challenge that we are going to face can be divided into two parts. One is like a hardware, the other is a software. So the hardware is that, of course, we need to have the infrastructure. And in some cases, I would like to point out that my colleague has already mentioned, some students didn't have access to the internet. So how can they participate in a teaching, in some lectures, without internet? So we have to have this kind of thinking, that we have to have the hardware very well solved. And the hardware, I mean, not just the connection to the internet, but also platforms like Google Suites and stuff like this. But we have also challenges in the software, that I mean, in the mentality, in the culture. So people have to think different and to act differently. And one of the challenges that I see that is nice is this open science or open innovation, which is, in my view, an important tool that will develop quicker now, with knowing that having no walls is better for the quick response and to develop, let's say, from the vaccines to better teaching. And I think this is one part of the software, the changing culture, that will be a big challenge for the future. But I think that making a parody with what Richard Dawkins talks about memes, which are the DNA of ideas, I think we had quite a quick change in our DNA, in our memes, during these 4 months here in Brazil with the pandemic. So we learned that scientific conference can be hybrid. This is quite interesting. I think we won't have to travel so much. But of course, in-person interaction is fundamental, especially to build trust in international collaborations and in trust between the different cultures. Different cultures, you need to have a kind of bridge to put them together. And one way to build up this bridge is to have personal contact. So I would like to end by telling that in these last 4 years here I'm finishing my time as a vice dean, we have tried to create many of these new bridges to destroy these walls. And one of them is this portal that called Portal Docentes. It is in English also, where you can find easily the people working in which area they are working. And I think this is the way to the future, as I said, about this open science, open innovation, that we open ourselves more to everything, to the society, to the enterprise, to the university around the world, to the people around the world, to the government, to everything else. And that's our main goal here for the near future. So thank you very much. And again, congratulations on this very nice forum that we are participating.
Thank you, Professor Griff, for the excellent presentation. I would like actually to thank both panelists for their very good presentations. And I now would like to move into a discussion. I will begin with a question for both panelists, which is how do you envisage workload of professors, teaching jobs, and traveling after the pandemic? Do you think there will be more workload for professors, or less, or the same? Do you believe that there will be a reduction in the teaching opportunities? There will be fewer jobs for professors? And Professor Griff has mentioned that there will be less traveling. Would you agree with that, Professor Rodriguez? I would like to hear both of you on those issues.
Yes, I think we've created a new habit here, which obviously was there to a certain extent before, but today it's the way we work. And that is precisely the way we're conducting this conversation. But not only this, the way we're conducting all of our meetings and all of our sessions, be that individual or collective, in our own realms of work. So that's not going to go away for several reasons, even once we go back to a totally normal situation in terms of health and in terms of contagion, once the pandemic is under control. For several reasons. One being, we find this quite efficient. I traveled about 50 times last year. I was twice in China. I was all over the place, 200 days at least of my time. And I was recently discussing that with my staff and saying, part of that was not needed. In hindsight, it was quite inefficient. So needless to say, I think we're going to be adjusting the way we work in different aspects of our daily activity. I think it is going to somehow affect how the life of professors works in the future. I mean, needless to say, it's going to be impacted. I think we're going to have to find more efficient ways to do online learning, and particularly the blended component in terms of how we combine this with face-to-face. I think we're going to face several challenges. Professor Griff was absolutely right when he pointed out to the fact that we're not working in the abstract. We're working in the context of societies that are not prepared for online learning, not because of the fact that the universities don't have the models, which I think, again, our universities are well prepared to move into that, but because of the fact that, as in the case of Mexico, about 56% of the households in Mexico have no computer. About 80% of children and youngsters in education, in academic ages in Mexico, in a recent survey a couple of months ago, were saying that they're facing huge difficulties in terms of how to connect to the new models. So again, there is going to be a transition. It's going to be slowed down by the social reality in terms of what's available out there and what isn't. Once again, I mean, in discussing things in recent conversations with Bill Gates and with Brad Smith from Microsoft and with different presidents from American universities like Michael Crow, who are far advanced and have been working on this possibility for years, they underscore the fact that it's not so much on the university side with regards to how do we build a new model. It's very much on the side of the realities in terms of telecommunications, in terms of access to technology that is out there.
Professor Griff, perhaps you could share your views with us on those issues as well.
I think, Assis, you have mentioned some very important points, that working in home office is quite challenging, and it may be one of the biggest issues nowadays that we will probably face for the next few months or so on, because it's quite stressful to not have this ceremony of going out, going to work and going back home, because you don't have anymore this frontier. Now I am working, now I am at my home relaxing. And even people have some difficulty with this. They are calling you at 10, 12 in the night, in midnight, asking you for things. And basically, this is quite stressful for many, many people. And that's why we had this teleacolhimento in Portuguese, so this psychological sustain. So people looking about that for students and for the professor, because for many people it was quite a lot of work. And many people said this to me, that basically they are working the double they did before. And that may be true. I think that we learned that we can be quite efficient working from home in many situations, but not all situations. So I think this is something that we will have to learn as we are learning about the disease itself, about COVID. It's a very complicated disease, and we are just learning how to deal with it. And I think we'll have to learn to deal with all these psychological problems that may be related to the fact that we are social people. So being isolated is unnatural. So I think that these are some issues that I'm not going into much detail, but I do agree with Professor Rodriguez, basically with all he said. And especially in a university like us, that we are in 24 different cities, I think we are going to have much less travel, and the meetings will be much more efficient by not having to lose. Basically, if you are coming from Ilha Solteira to São Paulo, you lose the whole day and maybe the next day just by traveling to have a meeting of 2-3 hours. And this makes no sense. So now I think we are going to think better on what is possible to do and not. And another point, Aziz, that I'd like to mention, I do take part in UPAC. So this is a worldwide organization for the pure and applied chemistry. And many colleagues which are more let's say, retired and have some issues with health issues, they cannot travel. And now they can participate in meetings all around the world. So this is something that we have to take into account also, that maybe for many talented young people or old guys, let's put it like this, we have a chance to participate and contribute in many different opportunities, different meetings and stuff like this that we couldn't have in the before. So I think the idea is this is the hybrid, the blended, or whatever you call it, will be the future for sure.
One point that Dr. Rodriguez raised was the difficulties on how to connect people, the difficulties faced by people to connect, by students sometimes. And this is one of the greatest debates that we have here in Brazil, as Dr. Griff is aware, which is to promote the inclusion of the people who are more vulnerable, who are the poorest, and who are in our universities. So this leads us to the question raised by one of our hosts, Professor Connie McManus, which is, how can universities guarantee access to students? And more specifically, how have you at Unesp and Tec de Monterrey guaranteed internet access and technology access for your students? So the question's for both of you. Please feel free to.
Okay. So Griff is suggesting I go first. Okay. That's a very difficult question. Obviously, no one has the answer. We can do all sorts of things in terms of the hardware, you know, and we're doing that. We're facilitating access to students in terms of buying their own equipment and computers and so forth. And as I mentioned, it is a big issue in Mexico, where a huge proportion of students don't have a computer at home, and they simply can't work out of their smartphones, however smart they might be. You know, that doesn't work. So that's a relative. I mean, it's not an easy step because financially it's a challenge, but at least in terms of being able to solve it from a technological standpoint, it's feasible. The most difficult part has to do with things where universities don't have a direct say or a direct solution, which is broadband, which is internet access in general. That is a big challenge. In Mexico, I don't know the situation in Brazil, but in Mexico at least, there is a tremendous lag vis-a-vis other countries in terms of access. And that is going to be the fundamental challenge. They keep saying, you know, some experts say this pandemic is the big equalizer, because we're all affected equally, because, you know, we're all affected by the shutdown. That is completely false. I mean, the portion of the population that is dramatically affected and will be dramatically affected over the next few months and years is the lowest income portion of the population, precisely because of factors like the ones we're discussing here. So there's no magic solution. Hopefully our governments are going to concentrate limited resources on the kinds of things that are urgent, such as this. In the absence of this, we might be transitioning into a blended hybrid kind of model, which I think we will. There are no many options to that, but it's going to be not exactly an equalizing force for our societies.
Yeah, well, in the case of UNESP, as is what we have seen from our experience, I'm talking about especially of the undergrads, okay? So we have more or less 38,000 undergrad students. And from our experience, we had to provide to about 10% of these students access to the internet. And what we did is that we bought this 3G, this internet by the phone, with the computer itself. So we distributed about 3,000 chips and computers to our undergrad students so that they could participate in the lectures that I mentioned. That were about 87% of the lectures are being held today. For the graduates, we didn't have so much trouble, but again, I like to say it's always, the question has two parts, hardware and software. And there is a lot of people who have adapted very easily to this kind of learning, and actually they are doing better. For the first exams that we are putting out, some of the students are doing better than they did in presence, but part of them not. So it's the cultural, so let's say it's the software. So for some people, it's easy to integrate and to learn in this new way, but for others, it's not so easy. So we always have to deal with these two questions together.
Another question that we have here was raised by Mr. Gilberto Coelho and deals with a topic that is important for our universities and that's very dear to me, which are the international connections, international traveling. Professor Griff mentioned in his presentation the importance of traveling for building international connections, for building international trust. How did COVID-19 affect the exchange of students and staff internally and abroad at your universities?
So may I start, Rodrigues, just for a change?
Please.
So basically, traveling was all closed down. So there are basically no kind of traveling, and the people that were abroad had to come back. So this was quite a stressful time, especially in the beginning of the pandemic, when all the borders starting to be closed down, and this was quite bad. But at the same time, as I mentioned, so we had already some experience in having this, let's say, in-house internationalization, so classes that the students could participate in another university, but at his home, doing exactly the same as he's doing now to have a lecture from someone from UNESP, having from the United States. And of course, this is not the same thing. The experience is completely different if you are just receiving. But as I say, I think what we are going to build up in the internationalization for the future is like an ecosystem. So there will be many different ways of doing internationalization, not just one which is rich of going outside and living abroad and really immersing in a new culture, but also some more, let's say, simple ways of doing that. It's just by participating in some kind of class virtually from, let's say, some guys in the University of Professor Rodrigues. So they will be just lecturing to us, and we are going to lecture to them. it is already quite a nice progress. But being very straight, no traveling at all, that was a big issue.
I agree with Carlos. We've had the same situation here. As I mentioned, we're very keen on building up our international programs. We have tremendous mobility. 11,000 of our students abroad as of late last year. 5,000 foreign students in Mexico in our campuses, and we had to stop that. And in fact, today it's not only that; it's all sorts of issues in terms of not only the health component, but also barriers in terms of visas and air travel and so forth. So that's impossible for now. Hopefully, we'll build up to the levels we had in the short term, but it's not going to be easy. There's an additional component here, and while I agree with Carlos in terms of other options and linking in a virtual way and so forth, and keeping part of the experience alive. We do a lot of surveys with our graduates, with our alumni, asking them, among other things, what has meant the most in your life from what you got in your university years, from your university experience. And you get the usual answers, and the level of faculty, professors that we had, the kind of partnerships that I built with my classmates, and the university experience altogether, all that. But the number one element that always comes out in the surveys is the international experience that I had. And that's a personal experience that you can't substitute with a virtual kind of experience. So we're keen on finding ways to build that up again as soon as possible once the conditions allow.
Obviously, it's very difficult to foresee the future, but when do you believe that we'll resume traveling of students and staff as before the pandemic?
Maybe Carlos knows. I don't. I wish I did. It's difficult. It obviously all hinges on how rapidly we go back to normal in terms of health. So far, and we just heard it this morning from Mr. Gates in his session with The Economist. There's some optimism in terms of having a vaccine being applied sometime early next year. And if that's the case, well, maybe we can expect that by the fall of next year we'll be back in place. But it hinges on what happens on the health side of things.
Yeah, I agree completely with Professor Rodriguez. It's nowadays we were just discussing this morning. This is such a complicated disease that we understand so little about it that we will have to try to see how it evolves. But making predictions on when is very, very hard. But I think we will have to live with it, learn to live with it for some time. At least for 1 year, we have to learn to live with it.
Okay, the next question is from Valmor Tricoli, our colleague from the University of São Paulo. He asks, in an academic and scientific point of view, what do we lose the most from the lack of face-to-face interaction?
Should I?
Please, go ahead.
This is always hard to answer exactly, because that's the point. We are just living it. So probably know about it in 1 year. We'll learn very well what we have lost. But going very, let's say, from principles, we know that Nobel Prize produce Nobel Prize. So the interaction between people and the way we learn is not simply by reading or just by being clever in a classroom. So we learn in very complicated ways. So being abroad, being with someone else, learning in this, as Raul has just mentioned, what's the most important thing they had in their academic life is going abroad and going immersive in a culture, because it's how you learn. So you learn culture when you go outside. You learn the ways you should do things. So this, of course, we are losing. And we are losing also, as I already mentioned, we need contact. So I think everybody is in an uncomfortable psychological situation now. They are not especially happy to be confined. So I think we are losing quite a lot from many point of views, also academic and scientific, by not being able to work together and to be abroad and meeting our colleagues and discussing with them. I think, probably we will have some data about it in 1 year or more. This is a very, very interesting question that our social politics researchers will have to deal with in the near future.
I fully agree with Carlos. This is a great question, and I can think of two angles in addition to what Carlos just said. About 7 or 8 months ago, I did a fireside chat with the Prime Minister of Singapore, and as we all know, Singapore has done some remarkable things over the past 50, 60 years in many aspects of their life, but particularly in terms of education. And I asked him, what is foremost in your mind in terms of what Singapore has to do over the next few years? This was before the pandemic, of course. And he said, well, climate change is number one because we're an island nation, and of course we're going to be direly affected if the sea level rises in the way that it is expected. So we're working strongly on that, and that is a matter of survival. But the second element that he mentioned was lifelong learning. And he said it's not simply a matter of skills, it's a matter of where you build empathy. And I think that's absolutely right. I mean, there's no replacement for ways to building empathy in terms of where it belongs, and it belongs to face-to-face connection. So that is instrumental. And the other angle is what happens, as is being the case, where you have to delay that face-to-face interaction. What happens when you have to continue, at least to a certain level, the social distancing, particularly to the younger generations? I mean, what happens with this fostering, this nurturing of empathy? What happens with the nurturing of being a good citizen? What happens with what kinds of things that can only be fostered, created, nurtured with interaction, with direct interaction? And it applies to everyone, but particularly thinking of the younger generation. I hope that the pandemic goes away for many reasons, obviously economic and social, but specifically because of the fact that we need human interaction to become better human beings and better societies.
We still have many questions from our audience, but very little time left. So I want to pose a question for both of you before we end. And the question is that with people going online, part of the university experience, which, as you have both agreed, happens in campus, has been left aside. Do you believe that after the pandemic, the role played by universities in the education of people will diminish due to this tendency to have more and more online teaching activity?
Carlos?
Okay. I don't believe, Aziz. What will happen is that our role will change, as always has changed. And there was already, much before the pandemic, as I already mentioned, quite a demand of the society that the university would participate more closely to the society needs. And Raul Rodriguez had mentioned how his university has changed his way of working to try to be more, let's say, responsive to the local demands and to the demands. So I think we are going to transform. I'm going back to this idea of the meme from Richard Dawkins. So we are just evolving our ideas. We are just through an evolution. So we are going to change, that's for sure. But the university always has a very fundamental, and I think nowadays even more fundamental, because people is the oil of the past. So people are the main source of change in the society. And universities produce people, good people, people that are reflective, that do work, and that transform the society. So we are let's say, the gold of the future. So I don't believe universities will play less of a role. But of course, that the role will be quite different, quite different.
Absolutely, yes. I think that universities will have a broader role, in fact. I mentioned the fact that, at least in the case of Mexico, we appear to be the institution where people deposit their trust the most. This is not a gift. We have to continue earning that trustworthiness. But it provides us an opportunity to be in the middle of a very difficult dialogue, I dare say, debate, that will be happening over the next few years. Because at least in the case of Latin America, and I think it's going to be the case around the world, but at least in the case of Latin America, we're going to be facing increased pressure in terms of poverty, in terms of income distribution, in terms of social mobility, in terms of social needs, etc. And the kind of pressure that we were already facing before the pandemic over the past year or couple of years was obviously pointing in that direction. We need to revisit the social contract, in fact, the way that our societies work together and gel, the way they come together. And there's no better forum to do that in terms of the knowledge and in terms of that trustworthiness than universities. So I see that added role over the next few months and years that I hope we play to the extent that it's going to be definitely needed in our societies.
Well, I would like to thank both of you for your participation. It was two excellent presentations and an excellent discussion. And I also would like to thank the organizers for putting this together, and all of you who joined us today. I hope we'll be virtually together again on September 22nd for the next panel of this series. So thank you very, very much. And it was a pleasure to meet you this afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.